Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our guests, wherever you are in the world. I know we've got a great audience today with people as far away as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then also locally here in the United States. I'm Jim Edwards, your moderator for today's webinar, and on behalf of my company, SOSI, and our Exuvera media service, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's event. Our topic today is one of critical importance, Afghanistan 2014 and beyond. Prospects and perceptions. This is the first in what we intend to be a series of webinars in which Exuvera brings experts together to discuss important issues while also paying careful attention to the differing viewpoints we often see in various media sources, be they U.S., international, regional, or local Afghan media outlets. After today's topic, we hope each of you will have gained an increased appreciation and deeper understanding for the various narratives that exist regarding Afghanistan's future. To help us dissect today's important topic, I'm joined in our Reston, Virginia offices by an impressive and experienced panel that will be considering a range of issues related to Afghanistan's political, economic, and security outlook. And I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. First, joining us from the Department of State is Eileen O'Connor. She is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia and also a Senior Director of Communications and Public Diplomacy in the Office of the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. While she is currently based here in the United States, she also has served in a similar role in the embassy in Kabul and has spent over 2 decades as an award-winning reporter for major media organizations like ABC News and CNN. She is joined by Rear Admiral Vic Beck, U.S. Navy retired, who, among other things, was the former Director of Public Affairs for the International Security and Assistance Force in Kabul, Afghanistan, during the so-called Afghan surge, 2010 to 2011. And from a personal perspective, I can relate to that time because I was commanding a Army brigade in Afghanistan at that time, so it was truly interesting times. Admiral Beck has held a number of policy posts within the Navy, including being the Senior Public Affairs and Informations Officer for the U.S. Naval Reserve, and he's currently retired and now in private industry. And then our third panelist is notable, Mr. Najib Sharifi. He calls home Kabul, Afghanistan. He has worked for some of the world's leading news organizations, including the New York Times, the BBC, CNN, National Public Radio, and the Washington Post. And he's also worked as a researcher for the Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit and Human Rights Watch. And I think he'll bring a perhaps different view and perspective than some of the U.S. Views you may hear today. So we're welcome to all of our panelists.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so the format today is we're going to take questions from webinar participants. So if you'd like to submit a question, please do so by chatting with our producer, and he'll pass those questions to me. And as we get started, though, I'll just begin by kind of seeding the panel with a few questions. So the first topic I'd like to get after today is regarding political and economic situation in Afghanistan. We often see through our media monitoring services that the Western press coverage is very different than the local Afghan press coverage. Recent public survey results by the Asia Foundation show Afghans are overall relatively positive about the future of their country, with 57% believing the country is moving in the right direction. We see a very divergent views sometimes in Western media. So I'd like to begin by asking our panelists which views, Western kind of negative views or Afghan relatively positive views are justified, and how do you explain this difference? And I'd like to start maybe with Najib today.
Thank you, Jim. I will start by saying that the coverage of Western media of Afghanistan has been extremely biased, and particularly lately. There's so much negativity involved in their coverage, and there's only a unilateral perspective that guides everything when it comes to reporting about Afghanistan. And the issue is that they don't look at the progresses that have been made in Afghanistan, and they understand where Afghanistan actually came from. Whereas the Afghan media, we have relatively more positive coverage, and it's because Afghans understand that before 2001, Afghanistan didn't have anything. There was no state, there was no media, there was no army, there was no police, and the country was an ultimate tyranny run by the Taliban. So the fact that we came from there to where we are currently, where we have a state that's got problems but it's functioning, where we've got an army that's increasing its capacity, we've got police force, we've got a parliament, and we've got elections, you know. So if you compare today's Afghanistan to what we had in the past, obviously it's natural that we should remain positive. And this is how, this is what I believe the reason is.
Excellent, thank you. So you think maybe people are measuring it by an unrealistic yardstick?
Absolutely, unrealistic, and they take it completely out of context, and they don't look at it in the backdrop of where Afghanistan started back in 2001.
Thank you. And Eileen, would you like to comment?
Well, I mean, having been a former member of the press corps, I don't want to totally blame the media. I'm not sure that I would agree that it's totally biased as much as it's informed from previous experience. And we have to be honest that, you know, we did in the United States in 1989, once the Soviet forces left, we largely walked away from Afghanistan in terms of our support. And so after that occurred, there was a crumbling of the Afghan army over time. Once the former Soviet Union also withdrew its money from the Afghan army, the forces dissolved and the country dissolved into civil war. So for many journalists, they look at that, they look at Iraq, and they feel that there is a sort of a deja vu. So there's not a lot of upside in predicting positive things for Afghanistan because they don't want to, quote, miss the story. But I do agree with Najib that people do ignore largely a lot of the progress that's been made. And I think also they ignore the attitude of Afghans themselves. And when you look at the elections right now, and you look at the participation rate, people signing up to vote, and also the vibrant debate that's going on in the media, not about personalities, not about ethnicity, which is what we've had in the past in terms of political leadership in Afghanistan, but they're really excited about the issues. People are debating the issues in a very vigorous manner. And I think that that really is what we should be looking at, because it's Afghans who are looking forward, not backwards. And I think right now the problem in the media and in our political discussions is looking at 2014 as some kind of cliff that we're about to fall off. It's not. It's another year in Afghanistan's history. And we have in place significant diplomatic, economic, and security support going forward into this next decade. And I think that that's what we're focused on, and we would hope that the media would focus on as well.
Excellent. And before I go to Vic Beck for his take, just a note, I think most of our listeners probably understand this, but we are about just 2 weeks shy of national elections in Afghanistan, which presumably will be similar to kind of the George Washington moment in our own nation, where the first democratically elected president of Afghanistan, after serving 2 terms, will transition power to a democratically elected successor. So I just wanted to point out, you mentioned the elections. I wanted to make sure everybody's tracking out there in the internet land. So Vic, back to you.
Well, so interesting. I'll go back to the question, and you asked which view, because Western press is more negative and Afghan press is more positive, which view is justified? And the answer is yes, I think is the answer, for any number of reasons. And both of my fellow panelists here said, were just spot on with their remarks. First off, I think it's fabulous that 57% of Afghans are positive about their future. That's what this is all about, by the way, right? So that's what the focus really should be. It is about Afghans and Afghans being responsible for their own country. The challenges in the Western press are massive in any number of ways, and it comes down to the business of the media. It comes down to how many people are actually there on the ground still reporting on what's going on in Afghanistan. It has to do with audiences around the world and their their desire for news or non-desire for news in Afghanistan. I can just tell you, so I've never been a member of the press, so I come from it from a public affairs standpoint. But I will tell you my approach when I showed up in Afghanistan. We're 10 years on in war, in the history. Well, even though I was brand new, everybody has an opinion about the war in Afghanistan, and it's in the public affairs world. You can break it down into 3 different audiences: the audiences that are for you, the audiences that are against you, and the people in the middle. There's nobody in the middle about the war in Afghanistan. So the concept and my approach was to ensure that people have accurate information, and that's the challenge, and that's what the media's charter is, to provide people with what's going on. But it's impossible to report on every single thing that's going on in Afghanistan, the good and the bad. And so I think it comes down to, again, news focus to reach audiences, to inform them, and what they want to digest and get information from Afghanistan. So it's very, very complicated. But again, I think the highlight here is that Afghans are feeling so positive about the future, and that's what it's all about.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to move on to another topic which has kind of been alluded to as well, and that's whether or not there are U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan in 2015. While the view is common in international coverage of Afghanistan that under the so-called zero option with no presence, a return to civil war or a return of the Taliban is likely, we found oftentimes local reporting in Afghanistan is much more positive about the Afghan security force's ability to prevent those outcomes. And of course, that is also kind of consistent with the messaging we see coming out of NATO. In 2013, 88% of Afghans surveyed expressed confidence in the Afghan National Army, and support for armed opposition groups has dropped overall, with only 35% expressing some sympathy for them. How much of these kind of deviations in views do you think is based on the continued presence of ISAF troops, i.e. the signing of the BSA, or a requirement for continued Afghan social and economic progress? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that the choice of a BSA is really an Afghan choice at this point. The president has said that he is committed to, that we believe it's in both countries' interest to have a train, advise, assist operation in some way, but it's up to the Afghans to choose whether or not they want to have a continued troop presence there in order to facilitate that. And so the BSA was negotiated, as you know, and a Loya Jirga, which is a representative body of all Afghans, was held, and overwhelming support by the Afghan people was indicated in that Loya Jirga. But the president has now indicated that we are willing. President Karzai has said that he does not want to sign the BSA. He's made that clear. And so we are willing to wait for the elections and for a future leader to determine whether or not to sign the BSA. Now, in terms of even if there is a BSA, that doesn't necessarily indicate what level of troops we're going to have. Absolutely. Although the president and President Karzai indicated in January 2013 that both sides agreed that some kind of train, advise, assist, and counterterrorism operation was potentially helpful for at least a short term in Afghanistan. But I think what's happening too is that a lot of people forget about the fact that in the NATO meeting in May of 2012, there was a decision by NATO countries and participating countries that we would financially support the Afghan National Security Forces. And in the preceding years, we have, in fact, been building up the Afghan National Security Forces. The training and advising and assisting has been going on for years. And that force has been shown as increasingly capable. Another thing that people do forget is that since last summer, in fact, the Afghans have been in the lead. They have been in control of security throughout the country. And really, already, it is the International Security Assistance Force is really in an assisting role at this time. So there is a lot of capability in the Afghan National Security Forces. They've done an excellent job this past fighting season. I think that they would indicate that they could still use some assistance, particularly with air cover and assistance in that regard. But we did make a $4 billion worth of commitment in terms of assisting the Afghan National Security Forces going forward. And history would show you that when the Afghan National Security Forces were assisted monetarily by the Soviets in the 90s, they held together. They protected their country. And they are this is a very well-trained force, much different than the Afghan National Security Forces have ever been before. And I think Najib could probably speak to that a little bit as well.
Yeah, Najib, can you give us kind of the view from Kabul?
BSA is considered extremely important for the political, military, and social development of Afghanistan. I was glad to see that the Afghan people, actually for the first time in their history, overwhelmingly supported an agreement which includes the continuation of the military presence of a foreign country in Afghanistan. And that itself shows the overwhelming desire of the Afghan people in having relations with the United States and the rest of the world. Well, the question is that I'm pretty hopeful that BSA will be signed, because candidates, the leading candidates, all of them have said that the first priority for us would be signing the BSA. And because the fact that we have not had the BSA signed yet, it's already left a lot of devastating impact on Afghanistan, particularly on economic development. A lot of people have stopped investing.
Property values in Kabul are falling, and
property values in Kabul has fallen. Even, there are some people whose wedding marriages have been halted because of BSA.
There's a lot of those really nice wedding halls in Kabul.
Yes, so its impact has been that huge in Afghanistan. It's mainly because people see BSA as the guarantor of continuation of political and economic and military development in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Whether it's justified or not, I don't want to speculate on that, but that's how people see it. Well, coming to the issue of Afghanistan's military capability, we've got a national army that proved that's very capable in fighting the enemy, and they have got the lead. And, well, they are bleeding a lot, but they have huge morale. And more importantly, never ever in our history there has been this much support on the part of the public for their national army. For example, 2 weeks ago, there was almost 20 soldiers killed in Taliban attack in Kunar province, and all over Facebook, people changed their profile pictures, to pictures of National Army troops. And this itself shows the significant support of the public for their army. And this is something unprecedented in Afghanistan. So the army has been capable, but it all depends on if, let's say, BSA is not signed, if the international community continues supporting Afghanistan financially and politically, we're good to go. Afghanistan will not fall.
So your view is zero option or a little bit bigger than zero option. So long as the support remains, the Afghan National Army will be fine?
As long as the political support remains, and as long as there's financial support for Afghanistan, and as long as there's clear communication of that political support, Afghanistan will continue, because civil war is such a lose-lose situation for everybody but the Taliban. Nobody has got an interest in a civil war. Whereas in 1992, the fact that we had civil war was, the realities of Afghanistan was completely different in 1992, whereas compared to today, everybody in Afghanistan, all political leaders, even the warlords, have a big stake in peace and stability of Afghanistan.
Excellent, thank you. It sounds like your view, the view from Kabul, is very similar to the view that Eileen just gave us from the administration. Vic, why do you think we sometimes see these divergent views in the media?
Well, that's a good question. And it's hard to take the overall view. I mean, you have to take the overall view. Every media outlet, every different reporter, every different, everybody's going to report something a little bit differently. And they see the world through their own lens. You can only see the world through your own lens. Why are they different? It's a good question. But ideally, you want all different sides of any different discussion reported in in the media, the good and the bad, the challenges and the successes. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a New York Times reporter and we were talking about an operation. And I was telling him what happened. And he said, well, the Taliban said this. And I said, well, but the Taliban lie. They're absolutely going to lie to you about what happened. And he said, well, I need their side of the story. And as much as I disagreed with the concept, with the fact that why would you put that in there, he's definitely lying to you, I understood it. And I understood what he's trying to do from his journalistic integrity to get both sides of a story. That's what you're supposed to do. So, again, I think the big challenge here is the separation that we've been talking about between the Western press and the Afghan press, or an Afghan's view versus a Western view. And it's not that simple, by the way. And we'd love it to be that simple, and we can put things in buckets that way, but it's just not. The Afghan national security forces, their forces are capable, but how capable? Look, we'd like to say it's going to be fine, it's going to be perfect. If everybody does exactly this, it's going to happen, and it's going to be fine. But the reality is you only know what happened yesterday, and even what happened yesterday is open to interpretation, right?
Yes, and I think Eileen wants to follow up.
Yeah, I do want to add, I think that in the media, again, like I said before, we have this comparison to what happened in the early 90s, et cetera, but we don't see what's so different. And I was in Afghanistan in the 80s covering the Soviet troops there. And so I really do see huge differences. For example, the training that has been gone on with the International Security Assistance Force has gone on with the ANSF out in the villages. The Soviets rarely left the cities, and so they did not have this kind of forward operating base presence, and they did not have a presence in the village, and they did not do what we call COIN, which is also the kind of building rapport with the villagers, supplying social services through the government, et cetera. There wasn't this kind of the systems by which the central government also helped supply important services out to the population out in the villages. That system is now established. That helps with stability. I think also the other thing that people ignore is the fact that the administration policy here has been threefold in economic, political, and security transitions to Afghan sovereignty. But in those transitions, we've built in a network of support. The Afghans now have signed, just like our strategic partnership agreement, they've signed strategic partnership agreements with dozens of countries. That's never happened before. So they have commitments of support from the international community like Afghanistan has never had before. We've also have an economic transition that was foreseen in Istanbul and Bonn and really kind of finalized in Tokyo with a commitment by the international community of $16 billion in the next 4 or 5 years, as well as for future commitments for the coming decade. So I think that all of these commitments are something that are completely different from before. And I also think the attitude of the Afghan people, as Najib was saying, is totally different. It is in everybody's interest. And it was also, I think we need to remind ourselves, it's in the United States' interest for a stable Afghanistan. We know what happened at 9/11, which was planned from Afghan soil, and that's something that we never want to happen again. And the administration is committed to ensuring that that doesn't happen again and going after the remnants of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations in Afghanistan.
Okay, Najib, follow up.
Well, there was one more important factor that we need to highlight to the audiences. Well, when we make the comparison between today and the 1992 when we had the Civil War, In 1992, despite all the other differences, the regional countries had a big role in creation of the Civil War. But what was the outcome? The outcome was unprecedented growth of extremism in the entire region, which has not only plagued Afghanistan, but also regional countries. Afghanistan became the country which produces 90% of the drugs of the world. So this was the outcome of their intervention and negative intervention, I should say. And this is creating a lot of problem for the regional countries, and it's created a big obstacle towards economic cooperation, economic integration for that region. So even if the if the rest of the world ceases supporting Afghanistan politically, the regional countries would try to their best to keep Afghanistan stable at this stage, because they know what the cost of an unstable and insecure Afghanistan will be.
Excellent, thank you. And several of you have just discussed the region, and that's where I'm going next. But before I do, I'd like to just give our listeners the results of two polls we've been running, and also our panel, I think, might be interested. So the first poll, we asked, is the Western press negative about the future of Afghanistan? Yes, no, or about right. Turns out 64% of our participants think the press is negative. None think it's positive, and 36% think that gets it about right. The second poll we asked, would a zero option necessarily lead to civil war? And our listeners think 22% think yes, and 77% think no. And I guess the 1% is undecided, but pretty interesting, I think. So transitioning to another topic here, several of you have already mentioned Afghanistan's neighbors, the importance of the region, and of course this is nothing new. As far back as the West has been involved in Afghanistan, there was the Great Game that was played out between various empires there. And of course, Afghanistan's relations with its neighbors are very complicated. For example, many Afghans believe that much of the insurgent threat inside of Afghanistan emanates from Pakistan. Whereas if you've spent any time in Pakistan, you'll know there's a very different narrative there. Pakistani media routinely reveals a widespread review that the country itself is a victim of instability stemming sometimes from the Afghan conflict. And then what do you think, for our panel, are Afghanistan's neighbors' interests in Afghanistan are in a 2015 and beyond period? And I'd like to add a second question. This came in from the audience, and it really deals with the front pages today. But what role do you see for Russia in Afghanistan and the likely impacts of the current Western Russian standoff vis-a-vis Crimea? So hopefully we can roll those two together. And I'd like to start with Eileen, please, if you'd like.
I think what's been really important is that we established a process in Istanbul that was really a regional process for the countries in the region to come together and talk about sort of their security and the security of Afghanistan, and really look at what was in their best interests, each country's, and also in the interests of the region. And there has been a recognition over the last few years, and particularly by Pakistan and even and by Iran and others in the region, that there is certainly a need that a stable and secure Afghanistan is in everybody's interest. And for the first time last year in Pakistan, they recognized that their greatest security threat was really an internal threat from extremism as opposed to an external threat from India. That was a huge recognition on the part of Pakistan. And Pakistan has, in fact, been trying very hard to help and assist in the reconciliation process. They've committed to helping in the reconciliation process that is underway, an Afghan-led process, to try to bring the Taliban to the table with the Afghan High Peace Council, which represents the entire country as well. So I do believe that there is now a concrete recognition in the region about the stability in Afghanistan, and that people are working towards that goal. In terms of Russia's involvement, they have been, in fact, part of our international contact group and have been helpful and in the assistance. And we do also, given the fact that there are so many former Soviet republics, as well as they are very interested in the drug trade. They're huge. Obviously, the drugs coming over the border has been something that Russia has been very concerned about. And so I do believe that Russia recognizes it's in their interest to work with the international community on ensuring safety and stability in Afghanistan. So I don't think that's going to change just because of a change in our concerns about Ukraine.
Interesting. Najib?
I agree with Eileen. The region has changed, and it's changing. I think the era of ideologies is going away, and the countries are coming to the realization that it's the economy that talks. And so based on this changing worldview, a stable and peaceful Afghanistan will be in the interest of all the neighboring countries, because, again, they are coming to the realization that if we have better economies, we can have a better role in the world, and we can have better influence in the world. In other words, talking directly about, specifically about Pakistan, Pakistan finally has come to the realization that, using violent extremism as a foreign policy tool, it not only generated the optimum results, but also haunted Pakistan itself badly, much worse than Afghanistan. So, considering this change in the worldview of the regional countries, they will be cooperating in having a peaceful and stable Afghanistan because they see that the region has got a great potential for economic development. We have got natural resources all over Central Asia, and we've got human resources all over South Asia. What lies in between is Afghanistan. So if Afghanistan is peaceful and prosperous, all of them will benefit from that. And on the issue of Russia, I think Russia has got a little bit of vague position about Afghanistan. It's been relatively ambivalent because it's been supportive of the international mission in Afghanistan, but at the same time it's wary of having the United States military establishment in its backyard. So how Russia is gonna behave towards Afghanistan in the future, to a large extent depends on U.S.-Russia relations in other parts of the world, for example, Ukraine, for example, Syria, and these countries, or the state of affairs between Russia and the U.S. in these parts of the world will determine how Russia will act towards Afghanistan.
Thank you. Eileen?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I think Najib raised an important point about the economic integration of the region and the potential there. It's the least economically integrated region in the world, and yet it has huge potential. So one of the things that we have also been doing is trying to kind of talk about our vision and the region's vision for a new Silk Road, which is based on the historic Silk Road trade routes that went through this region. And we're looking at, the United States has just announced a $15 million commitment to CASA, which CASA 1000, which would bring 1,000 megawatts of electricity through Central Asia to Pakistan, which has a huge energy deficiency and energy shortage. So it's these kinds of initiatives that are starting to take hold. We've worked really closely with the governments in the region on customs and borders and trade routes, and are working to try to break down some of the softer barriers of visas and customs and those kinds of issues, and build capacity in that area so that we can increase trade. And we are seeing some successes of trade coming from Afghanistan to India and to other places. And the countries in the region are very committed to it because they do believe that increased trade will lead to increased stability. And we are very, very committed to not just a north-south trading route, but an east-west trading route. A lot of the countries of Central Asia have huge trade with China, and that's something that we want to encourage because we do believe that will help lead to stability. And I would also indicate that we are committed to Central Asia These are former Soviet republics, but they're independent countries. And they want to show their independence, and they do show their independence, and we want to assist them in any way that they can as sovereign, secure countries. So.
Excellent. Vic, did you want to follow up on the regional perspectives? I'm
Well,
sure you
not
dealt
too
with...
much, really, because they said it all. But everybody's spot on. I mean, the only thing I will add really is that obviously everybody who's listening, everybody here in this discussion, we all want a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, and we believe, the international community believes that, and not that I can speak on behalf of the international community, that we all would benefit from that. But the reality is that we will always have idealists, extremists, and terrorism we will fight forever. You have to look at it kind of forever until you root it out. And there will always be people in not just this part of the world, everywhere. There will always be people that are always against, that have their own ideologies and to do things and think that peace and stability, it's not about peace and stability, it's about what they believe in. So it's just not that simple, quite frankly. We all believe it. I think we're all committed to it, and we've said all the reasons why. But it will continue to be extremely challenging. Whether the U.S. forces remain there or not, it will be extremely challenging for Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. But I don't think any of us are interested in walking away. We're interested in supporting and promoting a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. So.
Thank you. Maybe if I could try to summarize, it's the consensus of the panel that all the major actors are vested in long-term kind of peaceful, secure environments. Yet we still see this finger pointing back and forth of where does the problem come from? Well, it's not my problem, it's your problem. Can't you control the people inside your borders that are crossing into my borders and causing trouble? Why do you think that is, Najib, that we see these differing narratives?
It's because every country wants to, they don't want to take the blame, and that's why they keep blaming each other. And this has existed mainly between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Mm-hmm. Both countries have got problems. We Afghans, we love blaming Pakistan for everything, and the Pakistanis love blaming us. Whereas we have got huge problem with the governance, our own, how we govern the country. We have got a lot of problem with service delivery, and that's been a main reason, a strong reason behind the satisfaction of a big bulk of the population and creating sympathy for the extremists and insurgents. But at the same time, we cannot deny the fact that Pakistan has been the engine or the sanctuary behind creating, behind training, behind arming extremists and terrorists and sending them to Afghanistan. But again, at this stage, what's important is a unanimous consensus in the region with regards to the dangers of extremism. And I think this is coming into existence considering the fact that they saw that extremism is a phenomenon that cannot be controlled. Extremism is a phenomenon that does not recognize borders. It can harm people anywhere in the world. And if this consensus comes into existence and it's strong enough, then they will start cooperating with each other. And one other important issue is that when we talk about the extremism, we have always thought about how to kill them, whereas we have failed to go into the root of it, that why extremism comes into existence and how we can kill the root cause of extremism. This is a very important issue that needs to be seen important by politicians.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Did you want to follow up, Eileen?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think that that Najib is right, but I think that one of the things is that, we have this expression in the United States, all politics is local. But it may be an American expression, but it's true all over the world. So I think Najib is absolutely right that this is because, politicians don't want to look at the root causes as something that they're responsible for. But I do believe that he's also right in the sense that, we've made significant strides in helping the government build capacity and supplying social services, but corruption is still prevalent. And I think that's a real impediment to the successful delivery of social services out to the population, which is critically important for the stability. So,
excellent. Vic?
Well, to kind of actually bring it all back full circle from on the heels of that, and that's where the media come into play, right? And you always have. We talked a little bit about the different outlets in Afghanistan.
The fourth estate.
Some of them, we have those same outlets in the United States where it's just about this particular view. So it's not all free, or it's not all balanced. It's not all. It's opinionated. There will always be different media outlets that report on their opinion, and they're the only opinion, and it's the right opinion, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean every single thing that you could consume from the media is accurate and right in what you believe. I mean, you can't read and consume every single media report from every single outlet. You can't. You select and choose, just like every Afghan selects and chooses what they're going to consume. But then you have to make decisions on your own, for your own beliefs on what you personally believe. You can let it help shape you or not. So all of the stuff we've been talking about, I mean, is critical to the success of Afghanistan. We like to think that a free and open press is exactly what they need. And in some circles they'll have it, in some circles you don't. It's just so.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that kind of foreshadows my next question. Following the overthrow of the Taliban, Afghanistan free media really did flourish. There were over 500 new private TV stations, 158 radio broadcasters, and believe it or not, over 1,000 different newspapers or newsprints emerging since 2001. Often these independent-minded journalists represent a constellation of various political and cultural views. As a company that routinely attracts this sort of stuff, it's almost daunting. But we have seen over time there's this initial explosion, and lately we've also seen some negative trends in Afghanistan with regards to the free press. For example, Reuters reported on the 22nd of January that the government of Afghanistan had intervened and cracked down on some broadcast commercials calling for the signing of the BSA. Of course, it was revealed those were ISAF and NATO-funded commercials, but there is some government, at least intervention with some of the press. So I'd like to ask our panelists, who are intimately familiar with the media environment there, where they think the state of play is today with regards to the BSA and also the national elections, and is the press truly free and unchecked, or are there certain influences that are out there that are in some ways constraining their reporting?
Do you want?
I'd like to start with Najib first.
Like every other country, we have got our partisan media outlets. We've got some biased media outlets. We have got some media outlets that have follow the interest agenda of some of the regional countries because they're funded by the regional countries. But in general, the media have played and still play a critical role in shaping the narrative and making sure that the government follows that. Well, they've also played a significant role in creating a bridge between the central government and the subnational government, because we have got a strong central government in Afghanistan. The subnational government is very weak. So it's been the media that's acted as a very effective interlocutor between the two. So with regards to elections, Afghan media has played a very important constructive role so far. Some of the presidential debates that we had, I don't think we have the same level in terms of quality. We can have the same level of debates in the regional media. It was even unexpected for me to see that. So they continue to play a positive role. We've got some obstacles coming from the government. They are politically motivated. They are not systematic efforts to suppress media in Afghanistan. So they have played as an important role, and they will continue playing a constructive role in Afghanistan, in a country where we have just started practicing democracy, and media will play a very important role in flourishing the democracy that we've just started.
Okay, Eileen, please.
I don't think that the government is, in fact, cracking down as you would think. I mean, I do think that there are a lot of different outfits. There are some government officials that actually have an ownership stake in some of the media, and you can see some biased reporting or misinformation in some of those. But in terms of the government really cracking down on the media, I think in the case of the commercials, to be honest, we didn't want those kinds of commercials to be funded by the United States, because we felt that that would be something that President Karzai could, in fact, use against us, which is what happened. And largely also because Afghan media was basically supporting the BSA without our doing so, because they truly believed it was in the national interest. So on their talk shows and other things, they had politicians, academics on with a vigorous debate about the merits and the disadvantages or whatever of the BSA, and largely they were very supportive of the BSA. So I think I would give credit to President Karzai, and we have encouraged him, and he has basically seen that as a success of his, is keeping hands off the media and allowing it to build and develop into an independent media. We, the United States and the international community, have given significant support to journalism training, to some of the stations, to kind of help them build out their programming and capabilities in the various local languages. Now I think, though, there are too many TV stations, too many radio stations, and as we look for sustainability, the international community and the media in Afghanistan have kind of joined together and have come together to look at consolidation of some of the channels together, and also how they can keep up a vibrant media landscape and keep it sustainable and developing professionally in the coming decade.
Mm-hmm.
And on the heels of that, it's interesting because we've been talking a lot about the news reporting aspect of it, but it's not just that. There's entertainment, there's information, there's so there's this explosion of all kinds of information, which it can be a little like whatever the wild, wild west was in the United States a long time ago, but it's very embryonic stages still. So, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Najib, and that's and where you come from in Afghanistan for where we are today, just in the past 10 years, 12, 13 years, is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So it will continue to mature and grow and change and consolidate and move forward. But where it is today is a whole lot better than what it was, just because they have access to information.
And entertainment. I mean, I think it's important to note that, under the Taliban, there was one radio station, one television station, and essentially it wasn't allowed to play music, and sports were not allowed, and so, one of the most popular shows right now is Afghan Star, which is essentially American Idol, but an Afghan version of American Idol.
Right.
And it kind of brings the country together, rooting for their local stars, as well as also shows the country kind of is a great example of how the country is coming together like never before as a nation, and allowing, rooting for different ethnic groups. Doesn't matter what their ethnicity are. It matters what their talent is. And that's a positive development.
Absolutely. I remember, after 2001, when the national TV station just started broadcasting, we had a lady who read the news. And the next day we had a lot of criticism among religious leaders that a woman appeared on the TV station. But today, if you look at, for example, the Afghan Star program, you can see just young ladies, coming without any headscarf, just coming and dancing around on the stage in the public, So it's not only important in the sense that this is taking place, but the fact that the media has created acceptance among the public, for such thing to happen. The fact that they see, the fact that they don't go out on the streets and protest against it, it's a huge achievement. Again, when we talk about Afghanistan, we need to keep in mind what we had before 2001. Because if we don't factor in this fact, then we will get lost like the American media. And talking about media, one other important part of it is social media. It's actually today it's something that sets the agenda for the mainstream media. And a lot of people, when they want to take breaking news, they first go to social media. They first go to Facebook, or they check their Twitter account. That's what exists. And this has played a very important role in creating the platform for Afghans to discuss national issues and to comment on that, and then pressure both the government and the mainstream media to take that as an element of discussion.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to some of the questions from the audience here, so I'm going to shift gears on us. And I think this one's kind of interesting. It's not one that I have any metrics to share on some of the other questions, but and really I think I'll start with Najib on this one. But some of our listeners want to know, how do Afghans view the sacrifices made by U.S. and other NATO allies within the country? Of course, much of the press coverage here in the United States centers on President Karzai's comments, which frequently can be mercurial, to say the least. So how would you characterize the coverage in Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me start from here. Yes, President Karzai is our president, and with due respect for him, we cannot reduce Afghanistan to one man. Yeah. It's a big country, almost 30 million population, and one man cannot necessarily speak for the entire nation. So Afghans have a lot of sympathy, for the international troops stationed in Afghanistan. I mean, it varies. I cannot say it exists all over the country. There are parts of the country which are opposed to the very existence of the international forces in Afghanistan, but majority of them, as the lawyer Jirga demonstrated, majority of them want the continuation of the presence of international community, and their awareness has increased in terms of knowing why they are in Afghanistan for, because in the beginning there were a lot of conspiracy theories about their presence in the country. So in general, they understand the sacrifices of the international community, and they're appreciative of that. We've got political issues and political differences in the bigger level, but we should not allow that to overshadow what people think about American people, what Afghan people think about American people, and about the mission of the international community in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Eileen, did you want to
I would
follow
just
up?
say that very quickly, is that everywhere I went in Afghanistan, people would say, we want to thank you for being there, and not just for the military troops, but for civilians. I mean, we too left our families just like the military, and back here in the States, and also I've lost colleagues of my own, and so, civilians or military, the Afghans have been, in my view, very appreciative of the sacrifices, and they actually sometimes express surprise that people from across the world would come and sacrifice their sons and daughters and money for taxpayer money to help a country so far away. And I think it's a testament to the American spirit and to American values that it is something that we do.
Vic, nothing? Okay, I do think it's a good question because that sentiment is certainly underreported around here. Okay, I've got a number of other questions, several of them geopolitical. If we have time, we'll return to the Iran, Russia, China questions. But I'd like to also focus on some poll results first. We had a poll out, do you think the press will remain free in Afghanistan, as we go forward? And interestingly enough, the audience says 50-50, yes and no. Okay, let's see. Okay, so some of these I kind of already know the answer to from a policy perspective, but I'd like the panel to comment. We have a question here. Will a post-2014 Afghanistan rely on the United States, or can we expect other partners to share in the responsibility of funding support for the Afghan government? And Eileen,
I think the answer is really straightforward and simple. The international community is sharing in both economic support and support for the Afghan National Security Forces. So, like I said before, there's been commitments in Bonn, and Chicago and Tokyo for all of that.
Absolutely. Vic, did you want to?
Well, let me go back to and jump on the other question actually, because it's whether the question was whether Afghans appreciate the international support and everything. And the reality is, I don't think that's why we all did it, right? So that's not the reason why. The reason is it's the good of Afghanistan. Whether it's appreciated or not is not necessarily a relevant question. So there's not a single, and I don't speak for every single person in our military that served in Afghanistan, but whether they were volunteered or whether they were voluntold or they volunteered, everybody went to do good. Right? That's why we went, and that's why we're there, and it's nothing other than that. And everybody, you want to peel back the onion and look at all the motivations, they're kind of irrelevant. Just my 2 cents on it.
At the individual level.
And absolutely, and that's what makes it up. That's what makes us a whole, are individuals, and that's what makes up societies, are individuals, and they're always going to have some bad apples, but as a whole. And you move forward, you don't always move forward. Look, we have our own problems in the United States. There is no perfect country, right? We continue to work towards good, but there are people that are being murdered every single day in this country and in every other country. So let's be honest, right? They're working hard and making some great progress, and continue, and don't ever lose hope of that, and continue to work and strive towards a peaceful state of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And enabling people to live freely is really, living freely is their right, is their human right. And I think for the United States, enabling people to live freely is not something we do for thanks. It's because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Okay, another question from the audience, and I think the answer to this one will be important as well. The question is, are the various ethnic and tribal groups well represented in Afghan media? Or is the viewpoint we tend to see here in the West primarily the view of the Kabul elite?
Well, when we talk about Kabul elite and Kabul elite vis-a-vis ethnicity, Kabul elite is represented by different ethnicities. Right. So it's as simple as this, Well, the good thing is that we have, considering the number of media outlets, we have those outlets in all parts of the country. Of course, there are some bigger in some areas of the country than other areas of the country, mainly because of security reasons. But in general, they are well represented.
Okay, I'm told we have 2 minutes left, so I'd like, before we get off too far, just like to thank our panel for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge a wonderful audience with lots of questions we didn't get to, and hopefully you'll join us for a future one where we can get to some of these issues. But before we sign off, I'd like to give each of our panelists just a couple of opportunities for closing comments. So, Eileen?
No, I think that my only comment would be that, for Afghanistan, the future is brighter than anyone, I think, expects from the media. There's been so much progress, and the Afghans look at it as this is progress they want to maintain, but also build upon.
Thank you. Vic?
She's awesome. She said it very well. I mean, the one thing I would kind of tell everybody is to keep the right perspective here is that not everybody knows or cares about what's going on in Afghanistan, in the world today, the international community. So the way I put it is if you're 25 years old or younger, you know the sky is blue, the grass is green, and there's a war in Afghanistan. And you're not paying attention to the sky, whether you're a meteorologist, you're not paying attention to the grass, whether you're a greenskeeper, you're not paying attention to the war in Afghanistan unless you are personally somehow affected, and that's about it, because it's just a fact of life. It has gone on so long. So there are plenty of people that aren't paying attention, and they should be, because the international community is committed. That's where we all need to focus on ensuring that Afghanistan is a peaceful and stable place and a part of the international community going forward. So,
thank you, Vic. And Najib?
Well, as an Afghan, I'm deeply appreciative of the assistance that the United States and the rest of the international community has provided to Afghanistan, because without this, we would not have been where we are today. And again, Afghanistan today is extremely different, than Afghanistan in 2000 and before that. This is a shared war, a shared conflict, the right war and the just war, and we're both bleeding. Afghan troops, we lose around 40 of Afghan soldiers on a daily basis. And this is a mission that needs to be accomplished because we can't afford to lose. If we fail to accomplish, then the cost will be extremely high for that, not only for Afghanistan and the United States, but for the entire world.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to again thank our panelists for being here. And for all of our listeners, if you'd like to refer to this, we will be posting the webinar on our website, www.exovera.com. So we'll look forward to seeing you on a future one. And once again, thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.